farmers right now. I hear it, and I'm concerned about it, and I'm glad to have the good advice of Jim Nichols, who was the one who took us through the farm crisis in the 1980s, and he is going to be one of my advisors. But know this, I'm going to choose people who have the same ambition, the same experience that I do, people who are willing to take a risk, who are going to follow the rules, be direct and honest with you, because I know the value you bring to the state of Minnesota. We're going to build our future together. You are going to be my partner. Thank you very much.
We'll move on to the next question now, starting with Commissioner Johnson. Farmers have been struggling financially in recent years, and it's been accentuated in recent months by trade uncertainty and new tariffs on ag products. What specific strategies as governor would you propose to help assist families in rural communities during these challenging times?
Well, let's start with property taxes, and I think that there was a proposal in the legislature the last couple of years to actually move to house, garage, and 1 acre, not just for school operating referenda, but for actual school building referenda. And I think if it's good for one, it's good for the other, because some of you guys are getting hit much too hard by that. We also simply take too much money from people in this state. It's not just property taxes. We have one of the highest income taxes in the country. We have one of the highest gas taxes in the country. We have one of the highest sales taxes, one of the highest estate taxes in this country. We need comprehensive tax reform in this state where we start taking less money from people, which includes farmers, all over the state of Minnesota. That will be a priority for me.
Question. Well, farmers, there's two issues, supply and demand, and what we need for our farmers is a price and a market. And one of the things we need to do to make sure you have markets is to end trade wars that are impacting the ability to sell crops. You know, one of the concerns about the trade wars, you know, I hope that this had started with the attempt to negotiate, because you do have some real problems with China dumping foreign steel and hurting the Iron Age. But if this trade war goes on too long, one of the problems we're going to have is these markets are going to develop alternative supplies. And once they develop alternative pipelines, we could lose the markets that we have. And so I'm going to be an advocate, just like I've been an advocate for Attorney General and a champion for the state of Minnesota. I'm going to be an advocate for the agriculture sector when it comes to promoting markets, when it comes to trade, when it comes to trying to persuade the federal government about the impact some of these trade imbalances have on this sector of the economy. We also need to make sure that regulations do make sense, that we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach, that we're actually targeting the things that St. Paul does in a way that meets a common agenda and isn't unfair to farmers. And so those are a couple ideas. Thank you.
Former Governor Delaney.
Yes, to trade, we need to be tough on China, but we shouldn't be tough on our farmers. And so my message to Washington is going to be, if you're going to get the better deal, get the better deal. But in the meantime, don't trigger a trade war that hurts our Minnesota soybean growers and many other farmers across the state and across the country. Beyond that, we got to do what we can to control costs. And so let's make sure that that ag to school 40% credit on capital levies is extended and supported. If we need to move to house, garage, and 1 acre on capital levies, that would be great. We want to make sure we keep that for operating levies. I was a supporter of property tax caps when I was a governor, and do so again under the right circumstances. We should also make sure that our regulations are streamlined and commonsensical. They're too many, they're not coordinated, they're inefficient. To give you one quick example, the ditch mowing permit process, where you got to put a yellow light on your tractor, you got to go get insurance that's worth more than the hay, you got to wear an orange vest that you go get that's specially reflective, and on down the list. It's just ridiculous. So in addition to lowering taxes and keeping a lid on them, we need to have a more harmonized, more efficient, more common sense approach to regulations that affect our farmers in Minnesota.
Well, there's enough uncertainties in the business you partake in, and right now between weather and politics you're getting hammered pretty hard. We're not going to control the weather, but we certainly can control our politics by providing certainty to the things that we do. One of the things is we have a plan making sure that our rural communities and revitalization, putting the control of those dollars through USDA rural development back into local, county, and state decision makers' hands. Those are things that we can make sure we're targeting. Some communities, the issue is we don't have enough rural child care. We don't have affordable housing in those communities. Because a lot of your folks in here, I know one works off the farm to make sure you're making ends meet. And it comes back to the case is a lot of you are working to pay for your health care. We need to continue to tackle this issue of runaway costs on health care, allowing you to buy into Minnesota Care, stabilizing those individual markets. Providing those types of certainties will allow you to do this. I'm glad we're talking to Washington about this. a decision is made on this trade war, needs to end, needs to open our markets, provide that certainty back. As governor, I'll make sure that voice is loud and clear.
You guys all brought up, oh, I'm sorry. Hi, Erin.
Hi,
Representative
boys.
Murphy.
Blois and I have known each other a long time. So, first and foremost, the erratic behavior coming out of Washington, D.C. on tariffs and the trade war we're going to have a problem here in Minnesota with pork farmers and soybean farmers in the immediate future when we see a loss of sales to China and to Mexico. But that will continue next year when we have depressed bean prices, and that'll spill over into corn. So I am really, really worried about the tariffs and the trade war, and I wish the Congress would do something about it. And when I'm the governor, I'm going to stand with our congressional delegation and put a break on this current president, because the trade war that he's engaging in is no good for Minnesota and for our economy. I also will say this: if we elect a governor who invokes again a no new tax pledge, as Governor Pawlenty did, it means that we will see another increase in our property taxes. And the property taxes that you're paying now are a result of that pledge and pushing costs for schools and local governments up because of no local government aid. I will not do that. I'm going to balance the budget honestly with you and take pressure off your property taxes so that you can build your future.
Governor Pawlenty, we'll start with you on something that came up quite a bit this morning, early morning on the broadcast. And I'll get everybody's thoughts on this, but Minnesota, as you know, has long been a leader in renewable fuels, such as ethanol and biodiesel. So as governor, the question is, how will you support Minnesota's move to a 20% blend of biodiesel and expanding ethanol blends above 10%?
Well, first of all, there's the unquestioned champion of renewable fuels as a governor in the state, in the country, in the modern history of the country, and he's talking to you right now. So, when I was the chairman of the National Governors Association, this was our marquee initiative and priority, was to advance the cause of renewable fuels across the country. So this is the governor, I'm the person who brought you the biodiesel requirement. It's now finally being implemented nearly a decade after the fact, and so that's a good thing. We now need to get the federal government to recognize the need for and the proper use of E15 all year round. And so your next governor, and I'll do this, is to make sure the federal government embraces that approach. We also need to make sure that we protect the economically wise uses of other renewable energies that are helpful to greater Minnesota, including wind and solar, but again, do it in an economically wise way. And so if you want to know what somebody's going to do about renewable energy, you look at my record and I'll tell you there's nobody who has surpassed a commitment and drive to help greater Minnesota and rural America with those kinds of approaches and value-added approaches than me.
Attorney General Swanson.
Well, as I said before, you've got supply and you've got demand. Those are the two basic things that you can influence. And it makes sense, and I totally support renewable energy standards so that we can increase the ability to have markets. You know, you're in the 4th or 5th year of low commodity prices, and we need to do everything we can in the state to, you know, increase markets for you and create other opportunities. So I support the ethanol mandates. I also support the biodiesel mandates. In fact, I went to court to defend the biodiesel mandate. After it was passed, the trucking industry tried to declare it unconstitutional, and we went to court, we won that case, and so we have that mandate today. I also, I think it's important, we've got an EPA right now that is granting all these increased waivers to the oil refineries because they're supporting the big oil industry, and that's impacting this industry, the ethanol industry, and the biodiesel industry in major ways. And I think we need to advocate with the federal government, get them to stop doing that. There's something like 250 million bushels of corn that aren't getting sold because of the waivers granted to the refineries, and I'm going to go to the EPA and tell them to knock that off.
Commissioner Johnson.
So I will probably stand out a little bit here today because I have not been a big fan in the past of government putting a thumb on the market, whether it's with wind or whether it's with solar or other things. However, with respect to both biodiesel and ethanol, because of what government has done, an entire industry has been built up by the private sector around it, and people have spent millions or tens of millions of dollars to build it. So while I may have my questions about it, I'm not going to pull the rug out from under that, because that's not how you should ever treat people who rely upon government that has created a market. I would tell you this, though. What I think is even more important than that We need to create a climate, a business climate in this state that is conducive to value-added agriculture. Not through government mandates or subsidies, but because we are actually competing with states that surround us, whether it comes to taxes, whether it comes to regulations, or whether it comes to permitting. And I will do that as governor.
Representative Murphy.
We have seen tremendous progress with B20, and when I was the majority leader in the House, I made sure that we continued to advance that goal so that we could put it to work here in the state of Minnesota. I understand what it means for value-added agriculture and for the sustainability of the economies in greater Minnesota, and really for the whole state of Minnesota. I am very interested in further investment in the research that's going to drive innovations just like this one. So we continue to push ourselves forward, finding solutions that use the products that we grow in the state of Minnesota to build the economy for the state of Minnesota. That is critical to our future, and it is a core function of our state government to invest in that kind of research, and that is how we continue to make the progress that we're making, and I will do that as the state's governor. I met a man named Steve Persh. Steve Persh is an electrician in Wilmer. He is the one putting in solar panels across the state of Minnesota. It is a good job. This is a good frontier of our economy. We're going to make it grow.
And Congressman Walz.
Our renewable fuels industry isn't because of a government thumb on it. It's because of American innovation and entrepreneurship created right here in Minnesota. This is an issue of not just the economy, it's national security. Why would we spend $1 billion a day importing our energy from countries that hate us when they'll hate us for free and we can create jobs all across Minnesota? That's what we do. And as far as being a champion from the very beginning of advocating the RFS, we need to be very clear now. We need a governor of Minnesota who has the courage to stand up when the EPA administrator, former EPA administrator Pruitt, started to gut the RFS. We can't have silencing crickets because we can't challenge folks because they're of the same political party. We need to understand this issue of economic growth and renewables is about our future. It's creating jobs all across Minnesota. The state of Minnesota has led in this. We're seeing third and fourth generations. Up in Little Falls, we're moving to green biologics. It's moving us to butanol. We're moving these things on because of innovation, and the state of Minnesota needs to be a partner. As your governor, I've done it in Congress, being this nation's largest supporter of our biofuels industry. We will do it here in Minnesota.
We'll start this next question with Attorney General Swanson. In recent years, the state has moved away from voluntary approaches on water quality and environmental issues to a more regulatory approach, such as buffer law, nitrogen fertilizer rules, and pollinator protection. As governor, would you continue to focus on a regulatory solution, a voluntary solution, and what would be different than the current administration?
Well, first of all, I think most farmers would agree that water is important. After all, you live on the land, you drink the water, it's your wells. And so I think there is a common interest in making sure that people have clean water to drink. I think that it's important, though, to engage people in the conversation and in the discussions in terms of what the rules of the road are going to be. And I think that as governor, I'm going to do that. I'm going to listen to you, I'm going to listen to the ag sector and have a conversation so that when regulations are passed, they make sense and they're actually carrying out their aim in a way that isn't one size fits all, that's not St. Paul telling people what to do, but actually engages the community. With regard to buffers, in particular, I think there were problems with how that thing was rolled out, where you have to have buffers even though there's an uphill gradient, where the maps that the DNR was using were from the 1970s and they didn't reflect reality. And I support the tax credit proposal, the $50 per acre tax credit. You're taking land away from farmers, saying you can't farm on it. I think it's only fair then that farmers be compensated. I think we should have that tax credit put into law.
Commissioner Johnson.
So the biggest problem with the buffer strip law was not how it was rolled out. It was that no farmers weren't included in the problem solving. I have not talked to a single farmer who doesn't care deeply about water quality. And many of them have told me, here's some ideas about how we could do it better, whether it's on a voluntary basis or otherwise. But our state agencies, or at least some of our state agencies, have become so arrogant that they don't care. And that absolutely has to change. So my focus in all of my state agencies, not just the MPCA or the DNR, but all of them, they need to actually work with and include in their decision making the people they are regulating. And one thing I've thrown out there that I just love, I think at least some of our regulators should have to spend a couple days every year working for the people they regulate. So if you happen to farm, you can tell them personally how that buffer strip law is working out for them.
Representative Murphy.
And wherever I go across the state of Minnesota, people are talking about the value of water. People up in the Iron Range, people in the Twin Cities, people in farm country. Everybody wants to protect our water, and that value that we share is where we start together. I was at the Ag Expo a couple of years ago, and a gentleman came up to me, and he was pretty distraught because he felt like he hadn't had a full say in the buffer strip law. I am an awesome listener, and I have been working for 12 years building relationships with the people of Minnesota, and as I govern the state, I will be working with the people of Minnesota, getting our input, including us at the front end, and I know this, to make any sustainable change means you have to have the voices of the people and the support of the people, the consent of the people. That is how I will govern as the next governor for the state of Minnesota, and that is how we will protect our water together. Because I know we all share that interest for ourselves, for our communities, and for our kids. That's how we'll get it done.
Congressman Walz.
My mom's still on the farm that's been in our family over 130 years. This issue of protection of the land and values that go there, they run deep through many generations. We're going to need, over this issue of how do we do economic activities, whether it's farming in water, whether it's mining in water, whether it's lumbering in water, or whether it's urban sprawl in water. We're going to need a proven leader that brings people together to solve these problems. Many of you in this room, we worked together during the last Farm Bill on the conservation compliance piece. That approaches this the way the previous two administrations here have not done it the way we did it on this. We brought each other into the room, we set our goals where we wanted to be, and we laid it out with the assumptions that we have common goals and common values. We set standards, but we did it not with the regulatory piece on the front end, but with the idea of how do we work together and incentivize to get it right? How do we make sure that we're doing working lands conservation that understands not every piece of land is the same, but we can get those outcomes? This is not an issue of we don't know what we need to do. This is an issue of a politics that is based on divisiveness and dividing us rather than uniting us for the common good. All do that common good.
Well, the buffer strip process and outcome is a good case study on how to not treat farmers. Like I said at the opening, the farmers got stiff-armed in the process. They didn't feel like they had a seat at the table. And most farmers, nearly all farmers would say, of course, I support the idea of clean water. In fact, we would support the idea of buffer strips. But let's make sure we implement it in a way where we're partners, not adversaries with farmers. Let's make sure that we do it in a common sense way. And then let's make sure that if we're going to ask farmers to take land out of production, that we fairly pay them for it. And so we shouldn't impose these things, from on high, have it what amounts to a taking, and then not pay the farmers for it. And it's particularly insulting after you didn't even include them in the process. And the same for the way it goes with the nitrogen rule. And that needs to be reworked as well. So when I'm governor, we're going to make sure we treat our farmers as partners, not as adversaries. And we need to move towards outcomes-based regulation. Instead of playing, mother may I or father may I with the government, we should set goals together and then have you be partners in figuring how do you get to that outcome rather than trying to micromanage every little thing that you do, including what color vest you wear, what color light you got on your tractor when you do ditch mowing. It's really stupid.
In some rural Minnesota counties, farmland accounts for well over 50% of a county's tax base, resulting in very high property taxes. As governor, what measures would you propose to help reduce the property tax burden on Minnesota farmland while still maintaining support for rural schools and communities? We'll start with Commissioner Johnson.
Well, I already mentioned, I think, what would be the centerpiece of that, which is that we actually extend the house, garage, and 1 acre from just operating levies to actual construction levies. That is, some of the stories I've heard from farmers about a construction levy that passes and their neighbors who don't have farmland are seeing a $70 or $80 or maybe $90 increase, and they're seeing a $5,000 or $10,000 increase. That's not equitable. And it's not fair. And frankly, if it's good for operating levies, it should be good for construction levies. I also have been a strong supporter of a property tax cap, not what we've done in the past, but simply says that your property taxes cannot increase over a certain percent on your homestead in any given year. And then finally, maybe, as a county commissioner myself, maybe the state government should stop putting so many mandates on both our cities and our counties and not funding them, because they pass them right on to you.
Representative Murphy.
Many of you in this room will be familiar with the Minnesota Miracle, something that was passed many, many years ago that had it as a premise that we are going to share the benefits of the benefits and the burdens of our economy across the state, so all of our communities do well. All of our communities have what they need. And that has been replaced inside the Capitol now with the idea that we're going to have to compete against one another for the things that we need. When I am the governor, we are going to build our communities together, and that means things like local government aid and school funding formulas that will reflect the needs of our schools across the state and taking on health care for real for people. Because when we don't do those things, when we say we're going to cut taxes and we're not going to fill that spot, it means that we're going to shift the burden of the state budget to local units of government, and your property taxes are going to go up. That is exactly what happens when we don't do our job at the state level. When I was the majority leader, we put the state's budget back together again after we had a $6 billion budget deficit. We got to pay for the things that we want to do. We have to support our communities, and if we want to make sure our property taxes are low, we have to do that work together.
Congressman Wall.
Well, Aaron's correct about that. This issue, it started in 2003 when we had a massive cut to local government aid that put especially our rural communities at a great disadvantage. We started forcing issues where we have rural school districts that have to have bonding referendums to fix the roofs, but we see suburban school districts building dome stadiums with turf fields. What we end up with is not just inequitable education, we have an inequitable workforce across the state. Minnesota is stronger when we recognize the state works as one. When we make sure that we're making funding to rural communities, we're making sure our schools and the education we provide across the board. But this is pretty simple for people to see. The issue, once again, goes back to that proposition that we are one Minnesota that's united around a common cause. We need a governor, and it's the governor that I will be, that will make this case to taxpayers that we do need to be good stewards with their dollars. But it is in our best interest that that student in North Minneapolis get the best education to go out and get a job as they do at North Mankato. We do that by seeing our common values, our common goals, and then by building the political will to actually move something rather than talk about it. As your governor, I'll do it.
Governor Pawlenty.
I think it was covered earlier as it relates to the school levies. We need to keep the house garage in 1 acre. We need to extend that if we can to capital levies as well. And at the very least, we should make sure that ag to school credit continues on going into the future. But more broadly than that, we need to reduce input costs for farmers in lots of other categories. We talked about reducing the burdens of common sense regulation. The federal tax bill that passed had a number of important provisions for Greater Minnesota in it, including Section 179, amortization or depreciation. We need the legislature and the governor to support passing a tax bill that includes that. And the vision is indefinitely one Minnesota, but the problem is what's really going on, I think, with my Democratic friends on this panel is they want one Minneapolis. Higher taxes for everybody. They want more spending out of control for everybody. They want sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. They want the government to take over the health care. If you really think they're going to rein in regulation or taxes, just look at the different visions on how they view the role of government in your lives. You'll come to a very different contrast between whether it's Minneapolis for everybody or a common sense conservative vision for all of Minnesota.
Part about Minnesota is its people, and we've always done best in the state of Minnesota when we have a shared sense of values and a shared sense of responsibility and mission. And that includes St. Paul supporting all parts of Minnesota. We do best as a state when we don't pit the rural against the suburban, against the metro, but when we operate as a single one Minnesota. Now, how do we do that? We have to have a sense of shared responsibility. We should support local government aid. Smaller communities have a tougher time supporting infrastructure for fire departments and police departments. Local government aid spending is a lot less than it used to be. As a percentage of the general fund budget, it used to be a little over 4% of the general fund budget in the early 70s. Now it's just a little bit over 2% of the general fund budget. We need to make sure we're supporting local government aid. The school building bond levy, the 40% discount on 40% payment on property taxes reduction makes sense because of the unique nature of farmland. That's something that I support. And the other way to help with property taxes, though, is to grow our economy, to grow our farm commodity, to have open markets where you're selling and trading and getting a price for your commodities.
All right, forgive me for 1 second, but as long as regulations were mentioned only moments ago, by law, I have to say, at the top of the hour, you're listening to WCCO Minneapolis-St. Paul, WCCO HD2. So I'm all for getting rid of regulations, but I actually honestly had to do that. Sorry, boys.
No problem. I'm all for following rules, we all know that. Representative Murphy, we'll start with you on this next question. Healthcare is the #1 issue in the election, but it's also the #1 issue for farmers and citizens in greater Minnesota. They've dealt with high healthcare costs, limited options for insurance, reduced access. As governor, what proposals do you offer to address insurance costs, healthcare access in greater Minnesota?
Minnesotans should have health care that they can count on, especially when they're sick. I was here last year and talked to a gentleman in the audience who had a wife who had a hospitalization. He was on Medicare, she was on Medicare. They got a $20,000 surprise bill because she was in observation and not admitted to the hospital. They had to pay that out of pocket. He was surprised by that. That is the story of Minnesota right now. Across the state, people surprised by bills, paying for drug costs that they can't afford, deductibles and premiums that are out of reach. I've been working on healthcare now for 26 years in the state of Minnesota. We led the nation when we passed Minnesota Care. It's time to open up Minnesota Care for anybody who wants to buy in. Contract directly with our doctors and our nurses to make sure that we're getting the best value, the best care for the people, and we move those people, the drug companies and the insurance companies who are using their power right now to deny people care, move them to the sidelines, put Minnesotans and their care needs in the center of that. I have the experience, the head, and the heart to get this done for the people of Minnesota. It's critical for your family budget, for our state's budget, and for our economy.
Commissioner Johnson.
So I don't know if any Democrat up here will say this, but I believe they've all said that they want to move to single-payer health care eventually. And that is exactly the opposite of where we need to go, because the problem right now, at least in parts of greater Minnesota, you have no options. You have almost no choice whatsoever. And single-payer says that you truly have no choice. All insurance is gone, and you are now part of the one government program. We need to move in the opposite direction and give people more options. So for me, it means let's figure out ways to allow individuals to form groups so they can spread the risk out amongst themselves. They tried that to a small extent with farmers in the legislature this year. Let's broaden that. Let's start eliminating some of the coverage mandates we have in the state of Minnesota. I know it's good politics, but if somebody out there says, what's best for me or for my family is a limited coverage policy, why do I as governor get to say, no, it's not? I know better than you. I actually think we should be able to buy across state lines. I'm not convinced the federal government will ever get that done. But we can do that regionally by entering into compacts with North and South Dakota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. That will open up the market and give people more choices, and that is absolutely the direction we have to go.
Yeah, the healthcare costs are breaking too many families. You look at farmers. I've talked to so many who are paying $30,000 for a couple of two, and maybe a $5,000 or $10,000 deductible. That is simply unsustainable. Now you look at the reasons why healthcare costs are going up. About 17% of healthcare costs are pharmaceutical costs. Pharmaceutical companies are ripping people off. They're charging these outrageously high prices. It's a leading area where healthcare costs are going up. I've sued as Attorney General and gotten money back from about $100 million from 100 drug companies. We've got 20 drug companies in litigation right now because these companies are riding roughshod on people. Now, I would let all of you be able to buy into the state's purchasing power when it comes to lowering your pharmaceutical costs, because the state buys a lot of drugs, and the cost of prescription drugs that the state buys are 30 to 80% cheaper than what you buy. And in Oregon and Washington, they let people buy into those discounts. I'd let you buy into those discounts. I also think we should expand Minnesota Care for farmers and self-employed, people who are working but can't otherwise afford it. Let them get the good coverage. I also would appoint a Commissioner of Health and a Commissioner of Commerce who would aggressively audit the HMOs and insurance companies so they don't charge 1 penny more than they're entitled to.
Governor Plummer.
this issue of affordable health care is one of the most pressing and important issues for farmers, for greater Minnesota, and for all of Minnesota. It is breaking the back of families, of individuals, employers, and we need to slow down the cost of health insurance. This is just an area where the Democrats and the Republicans have a different view of how to do it. And so the Democrats would like to move towards, some in one step, some in several steps, single payer, which is the government take over the healthcare delivery system. I think that's a really bad idea. But if you're going to say that's a bad idea, then you have to have some other ideas of your own that are going to solve the problem. And I think it includes these. First, we should be able to buy insurance across state borders, so we open up more options for people to buy insurance as long as the options being accessed meet our consumer protections in Minnesota. Number two, we've got a quasi-monopolization of the healthcare market in Minnesota, where a limited number of plans or providers are controlling too much of the market. We need to get more competition in the market. We need price transparency. We need to make sure that we have the incentive for people to use the system wisely. And by the way, if I go buy a gallon of milk on the way home, there's no mystery what the price is. I can see it right in the dairy case. If I don't bring the gallon of milk home and then a month later get a bill from the grocery store for what the milk cost, I don't get a separate bill from the dairy farmer or the place that drove the truck from the dairy to the grocery store or the like. And so we got to clean up the system so it's more user-friendly. We've got to drive down pharmaceutical costs as well.
Representative Wall.
Are you ready for this? I totally agree with Tim on the price transparency piece. He is totally right on that. But here's the deal. This is not many of our first Farmfest. Some of us have said up here before. In 2006, those of you who were there then, this is the exact same conversation that we had then. And while the ACA moved things forward, we started to make sure people getting covered. We added millions more, started reducing prices on those plans were group plans. It didn't hit the individual market. We knew there'd be more work to be done. But we were told all these ideas would fix it. Remember in the last election? It'll be easy, they told us. It'll happen by February of 2017 once we have this done. None of those things happen because this issue is not political. What you want is, first of all, to not get sick. Secondly, you don't want to have to go to the doctor, but if you do, you want the care to be good, you want it to be accessible, and you want it to be affordable. So we should all agree on that piece of it. What we should be focusing on in Minnesota is getting everybody covered through Minnesota Care. We should prevent the diseases that we can. 85% of our healthcare dollars are spent on 15% of the population on preventable diseases. Minnesota can lead in that through research, through our great universities. That's where we start to bend the cost curve.
Speaking of the universities of Minnesota and other public colleges, Minsky and everything else, research and education through the universities and the public colleges is vital, obviously, to continued innovation in agriculture. So as governor, what would your plan be to ensure that there are adequate resources to support future research and education needs? And we'll begin with Attorney General Swanson.
Universities and public colleges are some of the best assets that Minnesota has, and we need to support them in all of the ways that we can to help grow the economy. I support, and we need to support research at the University of Minnesota. There was a push to get more funding to the university, and we should support that. And we should also, when it comes to agricultural resource, give the agricultural community a voice in that research and how those monies are being spent, so that it's spent in a way that actually helps you develop products and whatnot. I also support ORI to do research for value-added products. Again, I go back, supply and demand, and we can help with demand by finding other ways to sell your products. And so we need to support ORI and find ways to bring value, such as some of the soy-based road sealants that you're looking at now, to create an additional product for soybeans that are good for farmers, good for selling products, and also good for the environment. We then need to look at our grant programs and support that as well, so that we're supporting people who want to buy equipment to produce value-added agricultural products.
Commissioner Johnson.
So as part of their land grant university charge, the university is supposed to do research and share it with people. That is the whole point of extension. And I know in the past there have been a lot of political fights about this, where the university says we have autonomy in how we spend our money, and they don't seem to want to spend the amount of money that many in the legislature do on extension services. And so we started many years ago earmarking at least small pieces of that. I would not only continue that, but I would increase that, because I do not honestly trust the leadership of the University of Minnesota to carry out this mission. The other piece, I would agree with Lori in that you should have more of a role in what they're doing. When I hear some of the stories about where the research is going, it's for huge multinational corporations because there's a lot of money there. But maybe they should be doing the research that will help our small and mid-sized farmers rather than just the big guys.
Representative Murphy.
So I don't know if you saw this in the news last night, but Minnesota's got a new apple. It's called First Kiss. And we can get it at the state fair this year, but otherwise we won't be able to get it in the market until next year. It's a good example of what's happening at the University of Minnesota. When we invest in research, we drive innovation. I was the author of legislation in 2014 that created the Regenerative Medicine Fund to pursue solutions at the University of Minnesota with our biomedical industry in cure and treatment of really difficult diseases. We need to continue to do that in the ag sector, in renewable energy, and in healthcare. And we know ourselves as Minnesotans, right? We are smart, we are innovative, and we find the solutions that build our future. If we continue to have a battle inside our government over the role of the University of Minnesota, instead of saying it's time for us to invest in the research that is going to drive our future, we will limit that future. I'm going to build that future, and research is an important part of that because I know what it means for the future and I know what we're capable of.
Congressman Walsh.
Minnesota is the home of Norman Borlaug, and the Green Revolution started right here with our research. Billions of people's lives were improved and saved because of the research that the state of Minnesota and the University of Minnesota invested. That is our legacy. It is smart to put in preventative on things like soybean aphids. Going out to the University of Minnesota and looking at some of the things they're doing creatively with Asian wasps that kill the aphids, sting them, and then, oh, by the way, they nest in the buckthorn and kill it too. Those are smart things that we need to do. Those are smart investments. And the value added that we do, that's exactly where Minnesota's growth can come from. We know that we can produce, but when we produce and turn that into an economic engine all the way up the line, Mighty Axe hops out in Foley. We've got beginning farmer and ranchers getting back on the land, creating new markets. We have industrial hemp that we should be doing. There's all kinds of markets that we can go to. That is made possible by the research that's done at the University of Minnesota. And your job as taxpayers is to make sure we're making smart decisions and being oversight by the governor to say, this is our legacy. We're getting a bang for our buck that's coming back to us. That's happening, and your governor will make it happen.
Governor Blaine.
The University of Minnesota is a strategically important institution for our state for obvious reasons. One of those reasons is it needs to do research and then commercialize it in Minnesota. That's an important part of the value proposition for why we have a university, especially a world-class university like our University of Minnesota. That being said, there's a lot of frustration about them being ill-focused and not focused enough on Minnesota farmers and Minnesota products and how we can get more value-added next generation products being generated here in Minnesota. So as was mentioned, biopolymers looks like it's promising. The Minnesota Soybean Growers Association is very interested in seeing if road sealant and other things that biopolymers could be used. There's a burgeoning aquaculture industry that might be helped by the University of Minnesota in terms of shrimp farming in parts of our state that could use corn or other egg products for part of the feed for aquaculture and much more. But we need to have our great Minnesota University focused on those things. Just quickly, Tim Walz mentioned promises. I'll jump back to healthcare. Some years ago, remember, if you like your doctor, you can keep it. If we pass Obamacare, we're going to not only have more accessible medicine, but it's going to be more affordable. Individual rates have gone up 178% since Obamacare passed.
So this next question is really about balance. Some people in the media, those people, and even some of your campaigns talked about the differences between the metro area and greater Minnesota. When you think about that when it comes to infrastructure, including roads, bridges, rail, and river upgrades, as well as expanding broadband, how do you balance the interests of the metro area with greater Minnesota? And we'll start with you, Attorney General Swanson.
I've been balancing it for 12 years as Attorney General. I've been proud to represent all of you in this room and our entire state of Minnesota. And as I said earlier, we've done best as a state when we operate as one Minnesota, where we don't pit different parts of the state against each other, but where we lift up and grow opportunities in all parts of Minnesota. When it comes to transportation funding, I think that's an area the governor needs to lead on. We have a need for long-term sustainable solutions to our transportation system. That includes supporting both roads and transit in both greater Minnesota and in the metropolitan area. One of the biggest things, as I talk to employers, one thing they talk to me about often is transportation. We've got to have a reliable, modern transportation system to get products to market, to get people to go about their daily lives, and we have to do that in a balanced way. And when it comes to rural broadband, my mother grew up in a 2-bedroom house with 9 kids and no electricity. But yet in this country we had a rural electrification project that brought electricity to rural Minnesota. In the same way, we need to bring broadband to rural Minnesota as well. It's critical for kids doing their homework, for people doing telehealth, and for businesses to be able to expand. We've got to support broadband, put money into developing broadband.
Former Governor Flynn.
Of course, farm-to-market infrastructure is really important for a variety of reasons, and our infrastructure more broadly is really important. One of the roles that a governor can play is being the traffic cop or the enforcer for how infrastructure dollars get distributed fairly across our whole state. And so in any given year, there may be a big project in one area or another area, but over a rolling average of a few years, the money has to be fairly distributed. And you can sit on top of the Minnesota Department of Transportation and say, we got to change this differently. And that's an important role for the governor, fair distribution of the money. And then we need more money in the system. I know there's a lot of people here who support a gas tax increase. I don't think that's going to pass with a Republican legislature, including a Republican Senate that isn't even on the ballot until 2020. So what can we do that is the art of the possible? One thing we can do is dedicate the current sales tax on auto repairs and services fully to transportation. It would infuse a lot of new money into transportation, and we should emphasize, by the way, roads and bridges, not expensive mass transit projects that don't demonstrate efficiency and return on investment.
Congressman Wall.
Well, I don't give up so easy. I think we can pass some things, because that's what leadership in the governor's office is all about, making sure that if these are priorities for the country, we're able to move them forward. This issue of transit, again, absolutely critical to our lives. Used to be pretty much nonpartisan. It's the first Article 1 of the Constitution, even, post roads need to be built and maintained. That's the role that we do. But we have folks that once again tried to figure out if they can divide us and tried to make the case that if one mode of transportation, be it transit in the Twin Cities, was somehow taking from your local roads. The issue there is we are one state and we have multimodal transportation needs. Those do include transit and rural transit. They include highways, bridges, township bridges. They include locks and dams on the Mississippi. And what the governor's role is to talk to the taxpayers of this state, understanding what those investments make. If you look at it and hear somebody tell you, we spent $3 million on a bridge down in Jackson County that served about 15 or 20 families. And people say, oh, there's the waste. And then I remind them, those 15 or 20 families fed 50,000 people in the urban areas. We work best when we see our common interest and common goals. Transportation ties us together.
So in my 12 years, I spent a lot of time on people's doorsteps, in their living rooms and garages, and in a lot of conversations with the people of Minnesota. And there is absolutely a sense that we are estranged from one another, divided from one another. And I hear it this way. The thing that matters to me, to my community, to my family, is getting left behind by a kind of politics inside the Capitol right now that is too focused on beating the other side, too focused on winning the next election, and not delivering solutions for the people of Minnesota. And frankly, we're not going to fix that by having lunch together. We're going to fix that by bringing our powerful voices to the Capitol to make the change that I believe that we can make together. And that's what I'm going to do when I'm the governor. We're going to connect together again with broadband. And I've made a proposal to use the sales tax that's going to come into the state of Minnesota as a result of that Supreme Court decision. It's $140 to $200 million each year, new revenue. I'm going to dedicate that to broadband and connect us back together again. And when I am the governor, we're going to open up regional offices of 8 of them across the state. I am going to stitch us back together again, because I know that Minnesota is powerful when we stand up and we fight together for one another. That's how we'll build our future.
Commissioner Johnson.
So there is a divide and a distrust in Minnesota between Metro and Greater Minnesota. I spent the first half of my life in Greater Minnesota, born and raised in Detroit Lakes. My wife's from Crookston. We've been in the Twin Cities now for the second half of our lives, and I think the fact that I've got feet in both is going to help bridge that divide. And I find it interesting that all the DFLers are talking about, well, we're one Minnesota and it has to be fair. Over the last 7.5 years, if you look at the funding formulas for K-12 education, transportation, and LGA, they have become much more metrocentric than what they were before, and we are seeing the effects of that in Greater Minnesota. We need to look at those formulas again and make sure we are distributing them more fairly around the state. And specifically with transportation, since that came up, we need to do a much better job of prioritizing what people around this state need, which for me, first and foremost, means roads and bridges. But in the areas where we do need transit, and we do, then let's focus on what's most cost efficient, like a world-class bus system, rather than light rail, or commuter rail, or now trolley cars, which are the new darling of the left.
As governor, what would your approach in collaborating on important issues to the farm and food sector with Minnesota legislators, other Midwest governors, and federal government leaders, even if they are from the opposite party? And I'll start with Representative Murphy.
So I am a nurse, as you know, and I'm also a Minnesotan. And when I am the governor for the people of Minnesota, I'm going to be a Minnesotan fighting for Minnesotans across the state of Minnesota. I've got 12 years of working with Democrats and Republicans and a real record of success. Working actually with Matt Dean to pass a solution to Governor Palente's line item veto of general assistance medical care. We found that solution together. Tim Palenti, working with Kurt Dowd when he was the minority leader and I was the majority leader, so we could get our work done and get our work done on time. And as I listen to people elected to represent the interests of Minnesotans, when I listen to them individually, they talk about wanting to serve the interests of people. When they get inside their caucuses, that goes away. So I'm going to use the relationships that I've built with my fellow legislators across the aisle, but most importantly know this. I am running to be the governor of the people of Minnesota, to work with and for the people of Minnesota, and our interests across the state are coming first and foremost before the status quo interests in that side, that capital. They've got too much control right now. We break that when we stand together. That's what I'm going to do.
Congressman Wall.
First of all, on this issue, I'm not sure anyone's run for governor in modern Minnesota history that has worked on federal issues of 3 farm bills, working hand in hand with you to get results. This issue of seeing bipartisanship as somehow something special or to get a pat on the back for, that's what the norm should be. We come together with different ideas to solve the common goals of this state. And I have a reputation that I think is well earned of being one of the most effective legislators in Congress of moving legislation. Controversial legislation, or the things that we need to get done like the Farm Bill. That comes from building relationships. It comes from the trust that goes into assuming someone else. I don't assume the worst when they come to me, and stating clear leadership principles on the outcomes we need to do. I've done that whether it was in a classroom, whether it was in uniform of this nation, or whether it was in Congress. And so last year when they took a look at a very dysfunctional Congress, they said, if you want to know how Congress is supposed to work, look at the VA committee. That's where Chairman Phil Rowe, a Republican from Tennessee, and me, a Democrat from Minnesota, moved some of the most sweeping and positive legislation in decades. That's what I'll do as your governor.
As a former chairman of Midwest Governors Association, I was a clarion voice for Midwestern perspective and ag issues and farm and farm processing or food processing issues when I was the chairman of the Midwestern Governors Association. Same when I was the chair of the National Governors Association. I don't need to be governor again for the title, I've already got it. I don't need to go sit in the office, I've already done it. I'm running primarily for one reason, and that is to get things done for a state that I love and serving the people that I love in this great state. And there's a lot of great work to do. There's just a difference of opinion between Democrats and Republicans about how to best do it. But if you look at a record of getting things done for Minnesota, strong executive leadership, I can bring that to the office using my strength and experience, and we'll get that done, not only for greater Minnesota, but for all of Minnesota. And we mentioned a few issues here on partisanship. And so, Congressman Walz voted with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time in the past Congress, 94% of the time. When the Veterans Bill came up last time, he voted against it. When the issue of the Farm Bill came up 2 times ago, he didn't vote. He wasn't there. He was campaigning here. Last time he voted against it. So this issue of, he's the centrist when in fact he's voting with Nancy Pelosi 94% of the time really doesn't withstand scrutiny.
Attorney General Swanson.
As your Attorney General, these last 12 years, I've been your advocate and I've been a negotiator. I've taken on some of Minnesota's toughest problems and I've resolved them and I've gotten stuff done for the people of Minnesota. For 50 years, there were chemicals dumped into the drinking water in the East Metropolitan area. Agencies didn't do anything about it. The legislature didn't do anything about it. I stepped in, and after 7 years of very hard-fought litigation, we got an $890 million settlement, and we're going to clean up the drinking water with that money. A few years later, or a few years back, when the University of Minnesota was going to be taken over by an out-of-state company, costing Minnesota billions of dollars in lost public and charitable money and damaging our ability to grow jobs and innovate and research with the medical device industry, I stepped in and stopped that takeover. $100 million back from the pharmaceutical industry from the public that was ripped off by it. My track record's been one that's getting stuff done. We need to do more with the federal government. We get 53 cents back from the federal government for every dollar we spend. I'm going to chase that money and bring it here for research, for our university, for agricultural research like we talked about. I'm also going to meet with every legislator, all 201, before I take office, Republicans and Democrats, and find that common ground that people are so desperately looking for.
Commissioner Johnson.
So I am a conservative on the Hennepin County Board. So this is my life. I lose a lot of 6-1 votes. But I have also learned that sometimes you have to be able to set aside a big picture difference about the proper role of government or your worldview and say, hey, we agree on this one thing, let's set these other things aside for a day or a week or a month and get that one thing done. And that is what I have done both in the legislature and on the county board, and will continue to do that. And I can give you any number of issues where I know of DFLers and Republicans that we can form a coalition on, whether they're education reform issues, whether they're on tax reform issues, or better spreading the money around the state. But I can tell you the one that stands out most because I hear it from people all the time, and it is a very nonpartisan issue. And that is the fact that we have come to accept that every single session ends with the same dysfunction. And everyone is tired of that. And so I am going to be thrilled to be able to work with Republicans and Democrats to end these backroom deals at 1:45 to midnight and the omnibus garbage bills that both parties are guilty of.
Before we move to closing statements, we have time for one more question. One of the major issues in greater Minnesota is job growth, including the fact that the average Minnesota farm operator is in their mid-50s. Between immigration and growing next-generation farmers, as governor, what would you do to make sure that greater Minnesota prospers like the generations before them? We'll start with former Governor Plenty.
The issues and opportunities facing greater Minnesota in some respects are similar to all of Minnesota and the rest of the country. Greater Minnesota needs and wants employers and jobs to be present. They would like health insurance to be affordable and accessible. They would like their schools to be safe and strong and aligned to the needs of the opportunities of today and tomorrow. But then there's also some unique issues that are important to greater Minnesota. And that's why having a champion for agriculture, riding some of the waves that we have rather than creating new ones is a smart strategy. And one of the big waves we have is agriculture. And we need somebody who is going to be a champion for agriculture, food, and food processing in our state. But we also need to know that people aren't going to migrate to cities or places around greater Minnesota unless there's job opportunities. And so we need to be able to have strong incentives in an environment where employers want to grow and to add jobs in greater Minnesota, and we need the strategies to do that. And so the business environment in our state is really important. And last time I was governor, I'll do it again, we have special incentives for that kind of growth in greater Minnesota.
Attorney General Swanson.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we need to deal with the trade problems. If we don't deal with them now and the trade wars go on and on and on, these other countries will develop permanent supplies and we may lose them once they build up the infrastructure, and they won't come back if that happens. And so we need to get the trade situation under control. I'll do that with Washington. I'm going to also do trade missions to other countries and try to open up as best we can in light of the federal situation trade here in the state of Minnesota. We need to support ag education. You know, one of the areas is a 4-year degree isn't necessarily the best way for everybody to move forward. We've got wonderful community colleges and technical colleges. We need to support them. We've got a shortage of instructors. We need to have more ag instructors so that we're training people for the jobs of tomorrow. I'd appoint a coordinator to work with me in the governor's office to match up labor and our community colleges, the business community, so that we're training people for the jobs that are going to be coming down the pipeline. We need to make sure we have workforce housing so that there's housing for people. We need to make sure we have child care. Minnesota's got some of the third highest child care rates in the country, and we have a lack of child care providers, and so we need to deal with the child care situation as well.
Commissioner Johnson.
So two issues really stand out to me, although there are a lot of them. One is we have to be more competitive with the states that surround us so that the good jobs that are being created are created here. Not just because we have better people, not just because we're more beautiful or have better education than our surrounding states, because it also actually makes economic sense to do that. So whether it's taxes, whether it's regulation, or whether it's starting to permit at the speed of business rather than government, I think that's fundamental, and we can fix that. The other biggest problem I hear when it comes to keeping young people in communities is, well, they're unable to do it. I hear it every day that small businesses around the state can't find workers. Whether they're skilled workers or less skilled workers, they can't find them. So number one, I believe that we should have a work requirement for able-bodied people on welfare. We should take out every disincentive from work for those who are able to work in the state. We'll help solve that problem. And I agree with something that Lori just talked about. We have this assumption that every kid has to get a 4-year degree to be a success, and it's simply not true. And so as governor, I'll use the bully pulpit to actually celebrate those who are going for a different path, whether it's a trade or a tech school or an apprenticeship program.
Representative Murphy.
So I feel like I've had the best seat in the Minnesota House in the course of this campaign because I continue to see Minnesotans finding solutions to problems. I was in Alexandria not too long ago. There they have academies in their school. They are connecting the community and employers, high school education, hands-on in trades, in agriculture, in culinary arts, in communications, and healthcare. So high school students can get a sense of where they might want to go, and then creating that pipeline to their community colleges or to 4U universities. But the good news about this example is that those high school students understand that they have a job in their future in a community in which they grew up. That is creating a pipeline to employment in that community. We need to continue to do that work. We need to open up markets. This trade war that's going on in the United States of America is no good, and as your governor, we will conduct trade missions. We will find new markets for our goods and services so that you are able to sell your goods, because I know what you want are open markets and not a $12 billion gift from the federal government. And last but not least, we have to be a place where people want to come and live from other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And across this state, we know that immigrants are doing a lot of work and they're a part of the fabric of the state of Minnesota. And when I'm the governor, we're going to make sure those Minnesotans are our brothers and sisters, our Minnesotans who are contributing to our economy. That is important for the workforce of our future.
Representative Wall.
First of all, as your governor, I'll be a champion of this state. What you're doing and what people are doing, entrepreneurs across this state, is creating one of the healthiest economies in the country. And I think we can always do better, but this continuous that it's not good and I'm hearing the problems and all that, we can address and get after them. And it's not enough to point out problems. We need solutions. The question was about rural areas. We successfully, us together, passed the beginning farmer and rancher legislation that you know is having an impact of moving new people onto the land. We have Vets for Farm Bill, moving our warriors onto the land with smart policies that get them in our communities. What we know is places like Mankato that have Green Scene, that are collaborating together, state, federal, local, nonprofit, profits, to form a community that understands agriculture and agricultural expansion is the key to our future, where people want to come to our communities, welcoming communities. And that goes exactly to that point. We are going to need workers over the next 25 years. 70% of Minnesota's workforce is going to come from communities of color. It's in our best interest to have comprehensive immigration reform that makes sure the folks coming here, we know who they are, but we live on that tradition that we are a welcoming nation of immigrants that built the greatest country in the world. And your governor will do it.
As Boyce said, we've come to the point of final statements, so in this case we'd like to allow 2 minutes per question, and a pretty easy question here for you. Just tell us why the people of Minnesota should elect you as the next governor, Congressman Walz.
Well, first of all, thank you again to our host for this great event. It's a tradition that all of us look forward to. Thank you for all what each and every one of you do. I'd like to point out two pretty special people here. My father-in-law, Val Whipple from Ivanhoe, Minnesota is here. Thank you, Val. And somewhere around here is going to be the greatest lieutenant governor we could get in Peggy Flanagan is coming around here somewhere, state rep, so thank you to her. I grew up in a small farming community. I had 24 kids in my graduating class, 12 of whom were cousins. My mother sits on that land till this day. I joined the Army the day after I turned 17, and I spent 24 years serving this nation in uniform. I have the privilege and the responsibility of being the highest ranking enlisted soldier in the nation's history to serve in Congress. I tell you that. I used the GI Bill, and I became an educator, teaching our children and coaching our children and being part of our community. I never prepared my life to run for office, but I believe my life has prepared me well to bring people together around common goals, to motivate people to understand that we're in this together, and these differences and the pettiness of our politics divides us from what we can do together. This state's future is bright. This state's future is strong. It should not be that difficult to say, we are going to educate with a world-class education every one of our children. Whether they be white, black, brown, or indigenous, it's in all of our best interest to get that right. We can build an infrastructure that safely moves our people, moves our goods, and makes us as competitive as we possibly can. And we can have a politics that is predicated on the best of who we are. A politics that doesn't need to find division, a politics that doesn't need to be nasty, a politics that doesn't need to be petty, but a politics that stands firm on our principles but respects our neighbors. As your governor, I will continue to do what I did in the classroom, what I did on that football field, what I did in uniform, and what we've done in Congress, being someone who can unite this state around progressive vision of a better future for all of us that makes Minnesota, as it's always been, a place of opportunity, a place of fairness, a place of beauty, and a place that we want to call home. Thank you, and I hope we get your vote.
Governor Pullen. We have my voice of thanks to everybody assembled here for taking the time to hear out the candidates. Thank you to the sponsors and the hosts of this event. We appreciate the opportunity very much. Thank you to my fellow candidates. Running for office is a challenge on families and time and other commitments in life, and so I appreciate each and every one of them. The state of Minnesota is a nation-leading state in terms of our quality of life. Different people define that differently, but one thing that's critical about access to a good quality of life for most people is access to a good job or a good economic opportunity. There's a lot of ingredients that goes into having access to a good job. One is to make sure that you ask the employers what they need to start and grow jobs in our state. And the answer to that question doesn't reside with politicians. It doesn't reside with bureaucrats, who most of whom have never been in the private sector. It resides with the people who are the entrepreneurs, the dreamers, the innovators, the inventors who go out and take risks and try to build things and grow things, including economic opportunities and jobs every day. And when you ask those people, what do you need to have that happen in Minnesota? The answer is some variation of, please get the government off my back. For some, it's taxes. For some, it's regulation. Some just want things to go quicker instead of the process being so slow. Some just want it to have some common sense. But we need to bring common sense back to Minnesota government and a lighter touch, and in fact, less government in people's lives. So the visions that you'll hear today or heard today and we'll hear for the rest of the campaign, for those of us who may survive the primary, I hope I do, but we don't know for sure, is this. My friends on the other side of the aisle basically have a different vision for the future of our state. They want to raise taxes. I think taxes in Minnesota are high enough and we should bring tax relief forward. They want to jack up spending faster than your paycheck goes up. I don't. They want to look the other way on illegal immigration. I think we're a country based on the rule of law. We want to welcome legal immigration, but we need to crack down on illegal immigration. We need to have a regulatory approach that is more common sense and streamlined. And if you think the Democrats are going to bring that to you, vote for them. But if you look at the records of how they do that, that ain't the case. So we have a lot of work to do in this state. I don't believe in the government takeover of healthcare. They do. I think we need to have private sector approaches to healthcare. And the list goes on and on. So it's two very different visions for the future of our state. I'm running because I love this state, I love the people of this state, and I want to make sure we have common sense in government, not look a lot more and more like Minneapolis or California in some of our future policy directions. I hope I can get your support. Thanks for listening. Attorney General.
Well, thanks to WCCO for hosting this. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to our fellow candidates for participating in the discussion as well. You know, my great-grandparents and great-great-grandparents came to Minnesota from Sweden, from Norway, from Ireland, because they wanted a better life for their children. As I mentioned, my family, my parents grew up poor during the Depression. My dad was raised in Duluth and played hockey but couldn't afford skates. And my mom was one of 9 kids in a 2-bedroom house with no electricity and no indoor plumbing until after she left home. Yet here we are 1 generation later, and their daughter can be the Attorney General of the state of Minnesota, running to be the governor of the state of Minnesota. Only in a state like Minnesota is that possible. Only in a country like America is that kind of opportunity possible. And I want all of our families to have the same kind of opportunity that Minnesota gave to my parents. I believe that we do best when we grow from the middle out, not the top down, that our children should be able to aim higher and dream bigger and do better than their parents, and that we do best when everybody plays by the same rules and where everybody gets a fair shot at economic opportunity. Now we have so much gridlock in our politics today, where people are fighting, where they're led to believe you shouldn't care about the plight of others unless it provides some personal benefit to you, or you shouldn't listen to what others say unless you already agree with them. We've got to end that to move this state forward. We can't keep having legislative sessions where everything breaks down, where we don't have progress. As your Attorney General these last 12 years, I've focused on results. I've taken on tough challenges as a negotiator, as a problem solver, as a champion and advocate for Minnesota, and we've gotten the job done on issue after issue. And that's what the kind of leadership I'm going to bring to the governor's office as well. You know, if you think about it, we're a country that put a man on the moon. We found a vaccine for polio, and we invented computers that you can wear on your wrist as a watch and use to pay for your grocery bills. If we can do those things, we can tackle the challenges of today, just like our forebears tackled the challenges of yesterday. We can have in Minnesota the best education system so every kid gets a shot at success. We can have a more affordable healthcare system so healthcare costs and drug costs don't bankrupt families. And we can make sure that everybody gets a shot at a decent job that can pay the bills. I hope to earn your support. Thank you for letting me represent you as Attorney General as well.
Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up for this. I want to thank you, too, for coming out to kick the tires today, and I want to thank Donna again for being such an awesome running mate. My dad from Detroit Lakes is here somewhere, and I want to give a special thanks to former Lieutenant Governor Carol Molnow, who's hanging out with me this weekend and has been this week and has been a great supporter. I'm running for governor to change the culture in St. Paul, especially our state agencies, from that of controlling and directing and telling everybody else how to live their lives and run their business and farm their land and raise their kids, to actually serving the people who pay their salaries. Our state agencies exist for one reason only, and that is to serve us and not to control us. And so when I am your governor, state regulators are going to have a choice to make. They are either going to have to start acting like they work for you, or they're not going to survive the Johnson administration. We have seen, quite frankly, a war on ag in this state for the past 7.5 years, and when I am your governor, that will end. I hope for your support. Thank you.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. This has been a really awesome discussion. I grew up in a family that taught me about a powerful kind of politics, the kind that is about us, the kind that is meant to improve people's lives. And I am running for governor because I want to build our future, a bright future for everybody in the state of Minnesota, a future that includes all of us. I have spent 12 years with the people of Minnesota, and Minnesotans have been my very best teachers. Here's what I have learned. We actually care about each other. We will actually stand up for each other and fight for our communities. We love the place we love. We love the place we call home. We love Minnesota, and when we remember that and stand together for a progressive vision for the people of Minnesota, we can build it, and that is what I'm going to do. That is exactly what I'm going to do. Inside the Capitol right now are the powerful status quo interests that are holding us back from the things that we need to achieve together. They are the ones that are underfunding our schools across the state. They are the ones that are denying people health care. They are the ones that are polluting our water. They are the ones that are stripping opportunity and wealth from communities, from small farmers across the state of Minnesota, and it is time for us together to stand up and fight for the things that we believe in, and that's what I want to do with you. We will stand up for our children and our cherished elders. We will stand up together for our workers, for our farmers and our miners. We'll stand up for our teachers and our nurses, for our immigrants and our refugees, and I know that when we do that and we see in each other every possibility to build a future for ourselves and for our communities. We will get that done. That's why I'm running for governor. I hope to earn your vote on August 14th. Thank you very, very much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our democracy. I'll talk to you again soon.
Plus, I just want to take a second to thank Mr. TC and all of those here at Farmfest who have done this for many, many years and do a fantastic job. I didn't see anybody leave the building this whole time except when I did the station ID, but outside of that, thank you very much for being here, but congratulations. You guys do this successfully year after year after year. Appreciate that. Boys?
Let's make sure we thank our sponsors, starting off with the Minnesota Corn Growers who made this forum possible and broadcasting it live possible, as well as Napier Financial, AARP, and the Minnesota Farmers Union. Thanks to them and to Dave. Always great to work together.
Let's have a big round of applause for all the candidates and for KUD employees also. The Zoom show will start again. We ask that the candidates please exit the stage.